The air smelled faintly of coffee and fabric cleaner, the kind that never quite masked the recycled air. Amara's eyes stayed fixed on the page of her book, though she'd read the same line 3 times. The shadow didn't move. "You're in the wrong seat," the pilot's voice cut low, each word clipped. Her head lifted slowly, meeting his stare. His eyes flickered not to her boarding pass on the tray table, but to her face. Then the corner of his mouth curled. "Monkey doesn't belong up here," he murmured, just loud enough for the road to hear. The sentence landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. A pause stretched. The hum of the engines seemed louder now. A businessman across the aisle shifted in his seat, eyes darting to the window. Amara closed her book, deliberate, her fingers steady even though her pulse wasn't. "I'm exactly where I paid to be," she said, her voice softer than his, yet somehow heavier, smirked, but it wavered. "You people always think," the flight attendant's steps slowed as she approached, tray held awkwardly in midair. She didn't speak, no one did. Amara leaned back, letting the silence fill the space between them. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't give him the out of her anger. Behind him, a tall man in a tailored suit appeared. Darius. No words, no questions, just the weight of his hand on the pilot's shoulder. The cabin felt smaller. "Walk with me," Darius said quietly, like it wasn't a suggestion. The pilot hesitated, but something in the surrounding stillness, the watching eyes, the unbroken calm of the woman he'd tried to shrink, made him step back. The shadow moved. The light returned. Her pulse slowed, not from calm, but from the steady weight of knowing exactly what he saw when he looked at her. "Is there a problem?" she asked quietly, her voice steady, eyes on the book in her lap, his lips curled. "Only that someone put you in a seat meant for paying passengers." The words landed with the dull thud of something meant to bruise. A few heads turned. Most looked away. She inhaled slowly, the leather seat creaking under her as she shifted. "I'm exactly where I paid to be." He leaned in, close enough for her to feel the sharp scent of coffee on his breath. "You people always think, careful." The word left her mouth before she could think, quiet but edged. It hung in the air between them. For the first time, a flicker crossed his face. Not for irritation. He straightened, chest out, voice low. "What's your tone? I can have you off this plane before we even you could," she interrupted, eyes finally meeting his butt. "Then you'd have to explain why." A silence stretched, brittle. Somewhere down the aisle, a child laughed, oblivious, his jaw worked. "Don't test me." She tilted her head, almost a smile. I'm just not moving." He stepped back, but not out of retreat, more like someone preparing for a harder strike. His authority still clung to him, but so did something else now. The faint shadow of doubt, and she saw it. That was enough to let her lean back, slow, deliberate, without breaking his gaze. Somewhere, the balance had shifted just slightly, but enough that he felt it. Her smile froze. It wasn't the first time she'd heard that word, but something about the way he said it, like a joke meant only for people like him. Cut deeper. The man in the aisle seat shifted uncomfortably. "Excuse me." His voice was low, measured, but his eyes stayed locked on the pilot. The pilot barely glanced at him. "Just making sure she's seated properly," he said, chin lifting slightly, as if daring anyone to challenge him. The champagne glass in her hand trembled, but she kept her grip steady. "You mean me?" He gave a small smirk. "If you took it that way." The air felt heavier now. A woman across the aisle lowered her magazine slowly, eyes flicking between them. "You're in uniform," the man said, still calm but firmer now. "And you just called my wife a monkey." The pilot's smirk faltered. "Sir, you're misunderstanding." "No," the woman interrupted softly, "he's not." Her voice was even, almost quiet, but it carried more weight than a shout. Silence around them was no longer awkward. It was suffocating. A flight attendant froze mid-step, pretending to adjust a tray. "Listening, I think you should apologize," the man said, not loud, not threatening, just final. The pilot's jaw tightened. His authority, so solid minutes ago, was starting to crack. "Let's not make a scene." Her eyes didn't leave his. "You already did." For a long second, he didn't move. Then he gave a stiff nod, muttering something that barely resembled an apology, and walked away. But the damage was done. The cabin had shifted, and everyone knew it. The clinking stopped entirely now. Even the hum of the engines seemed quieter. The pilot's smirk lingered, but it faltered when her gaze locked with his. She didn't blink, didn't tilt her head, just looked. "You heard me," he said, voice lower now, though not softer. "Yes," she replied, her tone flat, unhurried. I did something about the way she sat back straight, hands still, eyes steady, unsettled him more than any raised voice could. He shifted his weight, glancing at the passengers who were still watching. "You're all right there." His attempt at casual fell short, landing somewhere between defensive and uneasy. Her lips barely moved. A flush crept up his neck. "Look, lady, it was just a habit," she interrupted, her voice still even. "Something you've said enough times. It no longer feels wrong." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. She didn't lean in. She didn't make a scene. She simply let the silence grow, pressing on him like weight. The stillness was louder than anything else in that cabin. One woman in the second row cleared her throat, her eyes darting between them. A man muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath. The pilot glanced at the door, as if escape might be an option. "It wasn't. I'll check with the crew," he muttered, stepping back. Her eyes never followed him. She turned instead to the window, her reflection steady in the glass. No victory smile, no outward relief. Inside, though, she felt the shift, the way control had quietly slipped from his hands without her raising a single decibel, and that, she knew, would unsettle him long after the flight was over. His voice hung in the air, still heavy from the last exchange, but she didn't look away. Not for a second. Her husband's presence had shifted the balance, but it was the silence between them that cut the deepest dot from the corner of her eye. She noticed the flight attendant mid-step, tray trembling in her grip. "Coffee, sir?" she asked faintly, though her eyes darted between them like she was unsure who she was speaking to. "No," he said, without looking at her. His attention stayed locked on the pilot, whose jaw tightened like he'd been cornered. The attendant lingered, fingers curling round the tray. "Ma'am, would you like—" "I'm fine," she said softly, her voice steady, eyes still on the man who'd spat the word monkey not 10 minutes ago. The tray lowered an inch, her knuckles whitening. She wasn't sure if stepping away meant safety or guilt. "You should probably keep moving," her husband told the attendant, his tone calm but weighted. For a heartbeat she didn't move, and in that heartbeat the truth bared itself. This wasn't about coffee, it was about not wanting to be seen picking a side. The pilot's eyes flickered to her husband. "You can't, you've already done enough," her husband interrupted, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. The attendant finally exhaled and walked off, her steps quick but uneven. Inside, the woman felt the faintest tug of pity for her caught between doing what was right and keeping her uniform. But pity didn't change the fact that silence was a choice, too. Somewhere down the aisle, the clink of glasses returned, but here, the air stayed thick. No one had touched their drinks, no one dared, because in this space, even breathing felt like taking a side. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Check your manifest before you embarrass yourself further." The captain froze mid-step, a faint twitch in his jaw. "Excuse me, you heard me." She didn't raise her tone. Her hands rested on the armrest. "Steady. Go on, look at the list. Seat 2A, see whose name is there." A man in row 3 coughed, the kind of cough that wasn't about clearing. Her throat eyes shifted. The flight attendant held the manifest like it burned her hands. "I don't need to," the captain began. "You do," she interrupted, "because the next thing you say might cost you more than your pride." For a long second, no one moved. Then the flight attendant, avoiding his gaze, flipped a page, scanned the column, and her face blanched. The captain reached for it, reading silently, his lips pressed into a thin line. "That's my husband's name," she said softly, almost a whisper meant for him alone. "And he's not just a passenger." The murmurs rose like a low tide. Someone's phone camera was angled, just enough to catch the moment. The captain's voice faltered. He shut the manifest, handing it back too quickly. "Misunderstanding." Her eyes didn't leave his. "No, it wasn't." A man in a tailored navy suit appeared at the front, walking down the aisle with unhurried steps. His presence seemed to pull the air tighter. The captain's shoulders stiffened. "Something wrong here?" the man asked, his voice controlled, cold. The captain's answer never came, because sometimes silence was the loudest confession of all. His jaw tightened as he glanced over his shoulder, a short, dismissive scoff escaping. "People like you." Always. He didn't finish. Maybe he didn't need to. Her gaze didn't waver. "People like me?" she asked softly, almost like she was testing the weight of the words. He rolled his eyes, straightening his uniform. "You're reading too much into it." The corner of her mouth lifted, but it wasn't amusement. "And you're saying too little." Her voice stayed calm, but the shift in the air was impossible to miss. From the row behind, someone shifted in their seat. A quiet cough broke the stillness. He adjusted his collar, pretending it was nothing, but his fingers tapped against his thigh, a restless beat. "You think you know who I am," she continued, unlocking her phone without looking down. "You think you understand what's safe to say, and where you can say it. His brows pulled together, faintly defensive now. Look, I've got a job to do. Let's not make this bigger than it is. It's already bigger, she said simply. You just haven't realized who's watching. The tapping of his fingers stopped. His eyes flicked around a quick scan, but he caught the stares. Passengers weren't pretending anymore. She glanced at her screen, then back at him. Do your job, she said, her tone almost kind, and I'll do mine. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but nothing came. Instead, another scoff, quieter this time, slipped out. Her smile lingered for only a second. She set the phone in her lap like someone placing a final piece in a game they'd already won. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was waiting. The captain's voice came over the intercom, too steady for the way his jaw was tightening. We'll be landing shortly. She didn't look at him. Her thumb tapped once, twice, sending the message. Across the aisle, a flight attendant stole glances. Sensing something but not daring to ask, the pilot leaned slightly into the cabin doorway, his voice low, pretending civility. Hope you enjoy the rest of your flight. Her gaze rose slowly. I will. No smile, just the weight of a statement that felt like the start of a countdown. You think you can, he began, but stopped himself. A passenger stirred in the row behind, their attention caught. His mouth shut, but his breathing had shifted heavier now. Edged, she spoke softly, almost to herself. Some things don't stay in the air, they land hard. The engines hummed louder, masking the silence that followed. He took a step back, but the space between them felt tighter than before. From somewhere behind, a child giggled, unaware of the storm in this aisle. The sound only deepened the contrast, innocence brushing against arrogance. You don't scare me, he muttered. Her eyes met his, unblinking. I'm not trying to. See the way she said it made his shoulders tense. Not fear, not threat, just certainty. And that was worse. As he retreated toward the cockpit, a few passengers exchanged confused glances, sensing they'd just witnessed the middle of something big, something that didn't need shouting to be dangerous. She leaned back, phone in hand, her heartbeat steady. Every second brought the ground closer, and with it, the moment his world would tilt. By the time they landed, she knew, he would wish the sky had kept them longer. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside the cabin, the air felt brittle. Maya sat upright, her hands still resting in her lap, the insult lingering like smoke. The pilot passed through first class again, his eyes skimming over her as if she didn't exist. You know who that is? The woman beside her whispered. Maya's gaze stayed forward. I know enough. The woman leaned closer. He's been here for years. People talk. A flight attendant said. He's been reported more times than anyone else. Every time. Disappears. Maya's jaw tightened. Disappears how? Paperwork vanishes. HR misplaces files. He's got friends up there, she said, tilting her head toward the ceiling, meaning the offices, not the sky. Across the aisle, a businessman muttered, medals don't mean morals. The pilot froze mid-step, shooting him a cold glance. You have something to say? The man didn't flinch. Plenty. Just not to someone who hides behind a badge. Maya caught it, the flicker in the pilot's eyes, a crack. Small, but, there, you think this is new. The businessman continued. It's not. This is a career built on people keeping quiet. The pilot's smirk was thin. Careful, sir. Defamation's a serious matter. So is truth, the man replied. The silence afterward was heavier than any turbulence. Even the flight attendants avoided his gaze. Maya could almost see it. Years of whispered complaints, shredded in offices that smelled of coffee and power. Her phone buzzed. A message from her husband landed early. Meeting you at the gate. She didn't smile. Not yet. But something in her posture shifted. The pilot walked away, but slower this time, as if the aisle had grown narrower. The hum of the cabin still clung to Amara's ears as the older man's voice broke through. First time flying first class? He asked softly, his accent deep and warm. She shook her head. No. First time. Being looked at like that here. His eyes dimmed, like a memory had just dragged him backward. For me, it wasn't a look, it was a gate. Amara tilted her head. Gate. He leaned in, speaking low, almost as if the plane itself wasn't to hear. I was a visiting professor from Lagos University, had invited me. Business class. Ticket. When I reached boarding, they smiled, scanned, and told me I'd been randomly reassigned. His fingers tapped the armrest slowly, all the way to the back. No reason, no apology. Did you fight it? She asked. I showed them the email, my credentials, my lecture schedule. His jaw tightened. They looked at my passport, then at me. That was all the explanation I needed. For a moment, only the quiet shuffle of a passing attendant filled the air. What did you do? I walked, he said simply, all the way past the curtain, past the legroom I'd paid for, past the respect I'd earned. Amara swallowed hard, and the captain, he gave a faint, bitter smile. Came to check the passenger list before takeoff. Saw me in economy. Nodded. Same smile your captain gave you today. The words landed heavy, settling in the space between them. Amara stared down at her hands. I used to think it was just me. His gaze was steady, unflinching. That's how they keep you quiet. Neither spoke after that, but in the silence, something in Amara shifted. Not rage, but a sharp, growing clarity. The hum of the engines filled the silence after the professor's story faded. Amara barely noticed when the woman across the aisle caught her eye. A small boy sniffled beside her, clutching a worn teddy bear. You okay? Amara's voice was soft, almost lost in the drone. The woman nodded too quickly, says fine. The boy's small hand tugged her sleeve. Mama. His voice cracked. The captain's shadow loomed as he leaned over. That same clipped smile Amara had seen twice already today. Ma'am, he said slowly, I'll need you to speak clearly. Your pronunciation is making things difficult. For the crew. Her shoulders tensed. I speak fine. My ticket, he cut her off, still smiling. We need to make sure instructions are understood. For everyone's safety. The flight attendant stood nearby, eyes fixed on the curtain she was straightening. Amara felt her jaw tightened. The mother's fingers gripped the armrest. I understand you, she whispered. But you don't want to understand me. The captain's smile twitched. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. The boy's eyes darted between them. His mother drew him closer, her voice low. Then do your job, without making my son feel small. For a moment, no one moved. Passengers, nearby, shifted, pretending not to listen. The captain straightened, his eyes colder now. Enjoy your flight. He walked away without looking back. The mother exhaled slowly, rubbing her son's back. Amara leaned slightly toward her. You didn't deserve that. The woman's lips trembled. No one says anything he knows. Amara met her gaze, that quiet weight between them heavier than any words. Somewhere behind them, the curtain fell back into place, shutting the sky's ruler from view. The captain's voice still echoed in her head as Amara leaned back, but her mind had already slipped. Years into the past, the steady rumble of the plane became the drumbeat of marches she'd walked as a little girl. Hold my hand tight, baby, her father had said, weaving through a crowd thick with chants. Why are they shouting? She had asked. Asking to be heard, he replied, his grip warm and certain. At home. Her mother's hands never stopped moving, sewing letters onto canvas banners. These words matter, her mother would whisper, the needle glinting in the lamplight. One day, they might keep you safe. Amara remembered sitting on the floor, tracing the bold, painted letters with her small fingers. Will they listen? To me too, she'd asked. They'll have to, her mother answered, though her eyes said otherwise. Back on the plane, she glanced at the flight attendant, still avoiding her gaze. The look was familiar, the same polite mask she'd seen, on school principals who mispronounced her name, on bank clerks who lost her paperwork. Her seatmate shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry about what happened, they murmured. Amara's lips pressed into a faint smile. It's not new. The seatmate hesitated. So you just take it? No, she said quietly. I remember, and I choose when to answer. Outside the window, the sun cracked the clouds in gold, and she thought of her father's voice. Not loud, not angry, just steady. She didn't raise her voice now. She didn't have to. The attendant finally glanced her way. Amara held the gaze for a long, unblinking second. Something in the woman's face shifted barely, but enough that the air inside the cabin still felt sharp from what had just happened. Amara sat upright, her fingers still pressed against her lap. Darius leaned slightly toward her, his voice low. You okay? She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the aisle where the pilot had disappeared moments ago. You don't have to do anything, she murmured. A faint smile curved his lips, not warm, but measured. That's the thing, he said, pulling out his phone. I don't have to. I choose to. Her chest tightened. She'd seen this look before in boardrooms, in quiet dinners, after hostile takeovers. Silence had always been his sharpest weapon. A flight attendant approached, trying to mask her nervousness. Sir, is everything? Darius's gaze met hers just for a second, enough to stop her mid-sentence. It will be, he said evenly. The attendant stepped back, muttering an apology. You think firing him fixes this? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Darius didn't answer. Immediately, His thumb hovered over his screen before tapping. "No," he said finally, "but it makes sure he never gets to do it again." She swallowed, watching him type a short, precise message. Somewhere across the country, a phone would buzz in a boardroom and careers would shift without a raised voice or a public scene. "That's all it takes?" she asked. He glanced at her, his tone calm but final. "For me, yes." The phone slipped back into his jacket. He leaned into his seat, closing his eyes as if nothing had happened, but Amara could feel it. The air had shifted. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just one text. She leaned back to her heartbeat steadying, knowing the story of this flight had just been rewritten. The champagne flute on the tray never made it to her table. Kaisha's phone was already in her palm. Screen, angled low, one tap, and the audio was gone. No caption, no context. It didn't need either. The attendant hovering nearby noticed the subtle smile on her face. Something funny. His voice carried that brittle politeness. "Not really," she replied, locking the screen. Her tone was calm, almost bored. Across the aisle the pilot walked past, clearly unaware that his words from minutes ago now lived outside the cabin. His jaw was tight, but his stride was confident, like men who'd spent their whole lives certain they'd never be challenged. "Ma'am, can I top that up for you?" The flight attendant gestured to her champagne. Keisha shook her head. "I think I've had enough." The audio, tinny but clear, was already moving through secure lines, landing on the phone of a man who didn't need to be told what to do with it. Darius never wasted words. A glance at the file was enough. Somewhere over a different sky, his aide was already calling numbers that didn't appear in public directories. "Everything all right?" the attendant asked again, his smile too wide. Now she met his eyes, held them. "That depends on who you're asking." Silence hung for a beat too long. The hum of the engines filled the gap. From the cockpit, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, giving updates about turbulence ahead. The sound carried differently this time, a little sharper, almost defensive. Keisha leaned back, eyes closing briefly. In her mind, the dominoes had already started to fall. The champagne still sat untouched, catching the cabin lights, a quiet witness to the fact that the game was no longer being played on this plane. The pilot's voice droned, faintly over the intercom, but Aisha barely heard it. Her phone screen still glowed with those 6 words. "Handle it your way. I'll be there when we land." She exhaled slowly, as if that would press the tension back down. The man beside her, the same one who had flung the insult like it was casual, was avoiding her entirely now. His jaw clenched, hands fidgeting with the cuff of his shirt. "You're awfully quiet," she said softly, turning a page. He glanced up, startled. "I didn't mean anything by it. People joke. Not everyone laughs." Her voice was calm, even. It unsettled him more than if she'd shouted. He shifted in his seat. "Look, maybe I already did." She didn't look at him. A silence stretched, pressing on the cabin air. Across the aisle, a flight attendant who'd been smirking earlier now kept her eyes on the service cart, her hands moving too fast. The man cleared his throat. "Is this going to go further?" She finally looked at him. "Depends on how far you've already gone in your life thinking this is fine." He swallowed hard, gaze dropping. Something in his posture deflated. The flight attendant came by with champagne, complimentary for first class. Aisha accepted hers with a nod, resting the glass on the tray table. She opened her book again, her fingers steady. "You're not going to say anything else," the man muttered. She turned another page, eyes scanning the words. "I don't need to. Some conversations happen without you in the room." The engines hummed beneath them. Somewhere above the clouds, justice was already moving toward them. Quiet but unstoppable. The attendant lingered by her seat, hands clasped tightly. "It's not just him," she murmured, eyes flicking toward the cockpit door. "People look the other way. Always have." Amara set her book down slowly. "And you?" The woman swallowed. I've kept my head down. Bills to pay, kids to feed. That's how it stays the same," Amara said, voice calm but heavy. The attendant's gaze fell to the carpet. "I know, but saying something, it costs. Silence costs more," Amara replied, almost a whisper. The woman hesitated, torn between fear and relief. "You don't understand." "I do," Amara cut in gently. "Better than you think." Her tone wasn't sharp. It carried the weight of someone who had been here before, too many times. The hum of the engines filled the pause. Passengers nearby shifted in their seats, pretending not to listen. The attendant glanced up, her voice shaking. "You're different. You have people who listen to you." Amara's eyes didn't waver. "That's why I have to use it." A flicker of something maybe crossed the woman's face. If I speak, they'll fire me, and if you don't, Amara asked softly. The woman's lips trembled. No answer came. She looked like someone holding a truth too heavy to carry. Finally, she straightened, forcing a small, tight smile. Enjoy the rest of your flight, ma'am. But her voice had shifted, less rehearsed, more human. Amara picked her book back up, though she didn't read a word. She could feel the attendant's words hanging in the air like a quiet verdict. Heavier than anything shouted. The cabin returned to its usual rhythm, but the silence between them stayed. The words landed like a stone in still water. Briggs' jaw tightened. Excuse me. His voice was low, but the coffee in his hand betrayed him, spilling a thin stream onto the tray. The man across the aisle didn't flinch. You heard me. You walk around here like you own the air we breathe. A few passengers shifted in their seats, pretending not to listen but leaning in just enough. Amara stayed silent, watching Briggs' shoulders stiffen. That's enough, Briggs muttered, but the weight in his tone was thinner now. The man leaned back, voice steady. No, it's not. I've seen people like you all my life hide behind a badge, a title, a uniform. You think it shields you from consequences. Briggs forced a laugh, but it cracked halfway. Sir, you don't know what you're talking about, don't I? The man's eyes cut sharp. It's easy to look down on someone you think won't speak up, but the thing is, someone always does. Briggs' mouth opened, then closed. The coffee pot lowered to his side. His hand didn't move to the next passenger. The quiet stretched, heavier than the hum of the engines. Amara could feel the air shifting, not loud, not explosive, but something was bending. Briggs cleared his throat, eyes flicking toward the back of the cabin. I have work to do. No, the man said, still calm. You have a choice to make. Briggs didn't respond. He walked away, but slower now. Each step weighed down. Amara exhaled quietly. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But the cracks were there. Hairline and dangerous. The kind that spread. The faint click of the keys was louder than it should have been. Briggs tried to focus on pouring the last coffee, but the journalist across the aisle was relentless, typing, as if each letter was a nail in his coffin. You got a statement? The man asked without looking up. Briggs forced a tight smile. I'm working, sir. That's fine. I'm working too, the journalist replied, still typing, except mine's already trending. Amara sat silently, hands folded in her lap. She didn't need to say a word. The way people leaned in from nearby seats, whispering, was enough to make the air feel heavier. Briggs' voice was low now, almost a hiss. You don't know the full story. Asterisk. The journalist finally met his eyes. I know what I heard. And so does the rest of the plane. He tilted his phone toward Briggs, the screen glowing with notifications. The headline draft was already there, brutal in its simplicity. Briggs' hand twitched. You can't just. I can, the man cut in, leaning back. And I will. The silence that followed was sharper than any insult. A passenger in row 3 took out her own phone. Then another. The sound of screenshots being taken, tweets being sent. It became a steady background hum. Amara didn't move, didn't gloat. She just turned her gaze toward the window, letting the murmurs swell around them. By the time Briggs reached the front of the cabin, the Wi-Fi had carried the story far beyond the fuselage. Somewhere outside, the engines roared to life. But inside, the noise that mattered most was already airborne, and it wasn't coming from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, Briggs' voice came through the intercom, but the steady baritone from earlier was gone. Words caught in his throat, forced through shallow breaths. We will be, arriving on schedule. The cabin went still. Amara didn't move, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes stayed forward, but her presence filled the air around him. Passengers glanced at each other, subtle smirks and raised brows acknowledging what they all heard. A man trying to keep his dignity from slipping. He cleared his throat. Thank you for choosing our airline today. The static hissed, but not enough to hide the crack in his tone. From her seat, the journalist kept typing. A quiet click-click, each keystroke puncturing the silence. Briggs set the intercom down, his jaw tight. A flight attendant leaned in. Captain, you okay? He didn't answer, eyes darting to the front row where Amara sat. You sure you want to keep this going? She asked softly, glancing toward Amara without turning her head. I'm fine, he muttered, though his hand trembled slightly on the throttle. Amara felt the weight of his stare, but didn't give him the satisfaction of meeting it. Instead, she reached for her phone, her reflection in the black screen calm, unbothered. Briggs shifted in his seat, the cabin's hum suddenly oppressive. He had faced storms, emergency landings, engine failures, but never this kind of stillness. and in that stillness, his authority thinned. The journalist looked up from his laptop, locking eyes with Briggs through the open cockpit door. A slow, almost imperceptible nod passed between them, the kind that said, "This isn't over." Briggs exhaled. Long and an uneven. The mic stayed off. For now. "Sir, your coffee," he said. Setting the cup down on the fold-out table, a single drop slid off, the rim landing dark against the white napkin. It bloomed slowly, spreading. His eyes didn't move from it. "You all right?" the passenger asked softly, her voice even measured. "I'm fine," he muttered, too quickly. The lie clung to the air. She didn't look at the coffee, she looked at him. "You weren't shaking earlier." His jaw worked. "It's the turbulence." "There isn't any." Her words were not an accusation, but a quiet statement of fact. He swallowed hard, the sound audible even over the low hum of the cabin. "I didn't mean." Her gaze stayed steady, the kind of calm that stripped away excuses. "You meant it enough to say it." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft clink of porcelain as he tried to steady the cup. "People forget words can stay in the air long after they're spoken," she continued. "Sometimes longer than a flight." His fingers tightened around the tray. "Look." She leaned back, cutting the distance, but not the weight of her presence. "You don't need to finish that sentence. You've already said enough." For the first time since boarding, he looked away from her completely. His hand, still holding the coffee, trembled again. From across the aisle, a businessman glanced over, then quickly back to his laptop, sensing the shift in the air. The pilot exhaled slowly, as if the oxygen in the cabin had thickened. When he walked away, the drop on the napkin had dried to a small, irregular stain, proof of something he couldn't take back. He didn't even look up when she approached. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but her voice cut through, soft enough that only he could hear. "Captain, you need to know." She stopped herself, eyes darting toward the first-class aisle. "It's her husband. He's here." For a second, the man didn't move. His hand, still on the control panel's edge, trembled faintly. "You're sure?" She nodded, almost apologetically. "They said he's the CEO of the airline." He inhaled sharply, but the breath didn't go anywhere. The sound was small, like someone had just punched the air out of him. From row 3, the black woman sat upright, calm gaze fixed ahead. She hadn't moved since the coffee incident, but there was something in her stillness now, like she was letting the moment come to her. "You can still apologize," the attendant whispered, before his head snapped toward her, a flicker of defensiveness crossing his face. "I didn't." "You did," she said. No louder than before. Silence. A passenger in the next seat leaned forward, pretending to adjust his bag, clearly listening. The captain's eyes scanned the cabin as though it had turned into a witness. "Stand." "Where is he?" he muttered. 2 rows behind her. "Window seat." The captain's Adam's apple bobbed. His face had lost its color completely, like every drop of confidence had drained with the altitude. "You want me to send him up?" she asked. He hesitated, fingers curling against his thigh. The plane began its descent, but his mind was in free fall. "No," he said finally, his voice barely holding. "He'll come to me." And somehow, everyone within earshot knew he wasn't ready for that. The landing gear thudded. A ripple of relief moving through the cabin. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but thinner than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome." Her eyes stayed on him, unreadable. He avoided them, fastening his harness like it could shield him. The head flight attendant lingered by his shoulder, pretending to check the galley latch. "You should know," she murmured. "The gates. Crowded." He glanced at her sharply. "Security." Her pause was deliberate. "Not exactly." The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began shuffling bags from overheads, laughter and chatter filling the space, but it all sounded muffled. To him, he could feel eyes on him, even from strangers who hadn't heard a thing. From across the aisle, she rose slowly, smoothing her jacket. No rush, no gloating, just a calm that cut deeper than anger. She placed her carry-on handle upright, and spoke low enough for only him to hear. "You might want to walk behind me when we leave." His jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" Her voice didn't rise. "No, it's a warning." For a moment, neither moved. The engines hummed, softer now, the plane rolling toward the gate. He looked toward the forward door, saw silhouettes through the small window. Not uniforms, suits, at least 4 of them. He swallowed. "Whose you'll find out." She turned away, her words almost casual, but her posture told him she wasn't bluffing. The plane eased to a stop. The seatbelt sign chimed again. Bags zipped. Passengers laughed, but in his seat, he sat very still, every muscle wired. The turbulence outside had ended. Inside, it was just beginning. Her heels clicked softly against the metal floor. She didn't look left or right. Double quotes, Mrs. Cole. Someone murmured from the crowd, their voice unsure. She nodded once, not slowing. Briggs stepped out behind her, jaw tight, hands clasped behind his back like he still owned the air between them. But the hum of whispered voices wasn't about him anymore. "You're going to spin this, aren't you?" he said, his tone low but sharp enough for her to hear. She stopped, turned just enough for their eyes to meet. "I don't have to." His mouth opened, but nothing came. Around them, executives shifted uncomfortably. A camera light blinked red. He started, "It's Mrs. Cole to you." Her voice didn't rise, but it cut clean through the hum. One of the executives stepped forward, nervously adjusting his tie. "We, have transport waiting, Mrs. Cole." The board, she glanced at him, and he froze mid-sentence. Briggs cleared his throat. "Look, I don't," she said softly. "Not here." Her calm wasn't for him, it was for herself. Each step forward was a refusal to let the ugliness follow her off that plane. The flash of a camera caught his face, pale and strained. She wondered if he realized the real storm wasn't hers to carry. As they reached the waiting car, she paused just long enough to let him feel the space between them. The quiet verdict no words could soften. She stepped in first, the door closing, with a muted thud through the tinted glass. She watched him standing there, still trying to hold his posture while the whispers grew louder around him. This time, she didn't look back. Briggs's jaw tightened, his words stumbling out like loose. "Change it. It wasn't meant like that. Save it," Darius repeated, softer this time, which somehow cut deeper. The space around them seemed to shrink. Executives shifted uneasily. Someone cleared their throat. Amara stood a step behind, silent. Her eyes didn't leave Briggs. She didn't need to speak. Her calm was the loudest thing in the room. The board chair held out a tablet. "We've reviewed the footage from the cabin, from the gate, every angle." He glanced at Darius, who gave the smallest nod. Briggs's hands twitched at his sides. "It's being taken out of context." Darius stepped closer, his voice steady. "Context doesn't make a man call a passenger what you called my wife. Context doesn't erase humiliation." A beat of silence stretched. The hum of the air conditioning filled the gap. Briggs looked to the others, searching for an ally, but no one met his eyes. "You've been flying for this company for 20 years, the chair said evenly. "You will not fly another minute for us." Something cracked in Briggs's expression, a flash of disbelief. Then fear. "You're making a mistake." Darius's gaze was unflinching. "No, you did." The words landed heavier than a shout. Briggs's shoulders sank, the fight draining from him. Behind him, a security officer stepped forward, not touching him, just waiting. The quiet felt like a verdict. Briggs finally nodded barely and walked out. No applause, no satisfaction, just a cold, clean shift of power settling where it belonged. Darius turned to Amara. "Let's go." She moved beside him, her presence steady. For the first time that day, the hallway felt wide enough for her to walk freely. The hallway outside the conference room was a wall of cameras, microphones, and restless murmurs. Amara stepped forward, her husband beside her but letting her lead. The flashbulbs flared, but she didn't flinch. "Mrs. Cole," a reporter called, "are you satisfied with Captain Briggs's termination?" Her eyes didn't shift. "This isn't about one man's words," she said, her tone even. "It's about the systems that let him think they were safe to speak." The crowd hushed. Another voice broke through. "You mean the airline's policies?" "I mean the culture," she replied. The quiet nods, the unspoken approval, the silence when lines are crossed. Darius stood still, his hands clasped loosely, watching her. She wasn't just answering questions, she was shifting the air. "Are you calling for further action?" a younger journalist asked. "I'm calling for accountability that doesn't stop at a single name on a termination letter," Amara said. "Until people in positions of power feel consequences for what they allow, this will keep happening." A few murmurs in the back grew, but no one interrupted. One older reporter lowered his mic. "Mrs. Cole, do you believe things will change?" She paused, the kind of pause that made every lens lock tighter. "Change starts when those who benefit from the system start dismantling it themselves. Until then, we'll keep speaking." The press pit went still again, not because she'd raised her voice, but because she hadn't needed to. Darius leaned in slightly. "We're done here," he murmured. That as they turned away, the questions resumed, louder, more frantic. But Amara didn't look back. She had planted something heavier than scandal. She had planted truth, and truth had a way of growing in places power couldn't control. The calls hadn't stopped all night. By morning, his phone was face down on the kitchen table, vibrating against the wood. His wife stood in the doorway, arms folded, lips pressed. "Thin, they're saying your name on every channel," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "It'll blow over." Her voice cut sharper. "It won't. Not this time." From the television in the corner, a reporter's voice carried through the room. "Former pilot, Daniel Reeves." He winced at the word former. The anchor didn't pause, didn't soften, fired immediately following a first-class incident involving racial slurs toward a passenger. The sound of it hearing his title erased landed heavier than he expected. "They've taken my license," he muttered, almost to himself. "You handed it to them," she replied. No anger in her tone, now just a hollow finality. Outside, a delivery truck slowed, the driver craning his neck toward the house. Even strangers wanted to see the man who'd fallen overnight. "They can't just..." He stopped mid-sentence. There was nothing to finish. The world had already decided that the closet door in the hall was slightly ajar. His uniform hung there, like an accusation, pressed, perfect, untouched. For years, it had been his armor. Now it was nothing. He reached for it but stopped short. His wife's eyes followed his hesitation. "You wear that now," she said softly, "and all they'll see is shame." He let his hand drop. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. It was 9 a.m. Daniel Reeves no longer had anywhere to be. "Would you like me to also go back and make sure subheading 3 flows even more seamlessly into this one, so it feels like a single, uninterrupted scene?" The phone vibrated once, then fell silent. Again he didn't move. From the kitchen doorway, his wife's voice was flat. "You're not going to answer that." "They'll stop calling," he muttered, eyes fixed on the cold mug in his hands. "They always stop." She didn't reply, just stood there, arms folded, watching him the way someone might watch a stranger. Another notification lit the screen. A missed call, then a message. "Captain, we need to talk." He let it fade to black. "You could at least explain to them," she said finally. "Say it was a mistake. People forget." His jaw tightened. "They don't forget this." The silence stretched. The hum of the fridge was louder than both of them. Later, at the grocery store, an old co-pilot passed him in the bread aisle. The man glanced up, recognized him, then turned sharply down another row. It landed heavier than any headline dotted dinner. His daughter pushed her plate away untouched. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten all day," his wife said gently. The girl's eyes stayed on her lap. I don't like when people look at us like that." He started to speak, but the words tangled somewhere in his throat. He could only manage, "I know." After she left the table, he sat there staring at the empty chair. The sound of her retreating footsteps felt like a verdict. That night, alone in the living room, he scrolled through his contacts. Names of people who once answered on the first ring. His thumb hovered over one, then another, and finally, he set the phone face down. The silence, he realized, wasn't going anywhere. The city hums faintly beneath them, a low chorus that fills the space between words. Darius sets the glass in front of her, the stem cool against her fingers. "You didn't raise your voice once," he says, not looking at her. Amara's gaze stays fixed on the skyline. "Didn't need to." The air between them feels heavy, but calm, like a storm that passed without breaking the windows. He leans back in his chair. "I wanted to step in. You know that, right?" "I know." Her tone isn't sharp, it's steady, almost soft, but sometimes, letting them hear themselves is louder than anything we could say. A siren wails somewhere far off. She takes a sip, the wine rich and slow on her tongue. "People were watching," he says quietly. "They always are." She rests the glass down gently. "What matters is how you leave them when the watching stops." Darius studies her, the lines in his forehead easing. "You left him small." Amara finally turns toward him, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting her lips. "I left him exactly where his words put him." For a moment neither speaks. The night air brushes past them, carrying the faint smell of rain. "Do you think he'll recover?" Darius asks. "From me? Probably. From himself? That's harder." Her hand brushes his across the table, not a toast, not a celebration, just presence. "You scare me sometimes," he admits. "Good," she says simply, picking up her glass again, and then, as the city's lights blink in the distance, they sink back into silence, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that proves the fight is over and they've already won. "Did you see this?" Malik slid the tablet across the table to Lena. The headline was small, almost buried. "Airline implements new anti-discrimination policy." She read it slowly, her eyes scanning the clinical phrases. "Diversity training. Zero tolerance policy. commitment to inclusivity, words polished to the point of emptiness. They're trying to fix their image, Malik said. Not the problem. Lena stayed quiet for a moment. She'd learned that silence often spoke louder. It's a start, she murmured, though her tone was flat. Across the city, in boardrooms far from the terminal gates, executives rehearsed their lines for press briefings. Cameras would catch the smiles, the careful phrasing, but not the shifting in their seats, the sideways glances that betrayed unease. They all knew the real reason behind the changes. Then the days that followed, inboxes filled with letters from former passengers. Stories once shrugged off now came pouring in, a black mother forced to check her baby's stroller while white families rolled theirs on board. A man pulled from first class by mistake 3 times in 1 year. A teen girl told to fix her hair before boarding. They didn't care until it went public, Malik said, reading one of the accounts aloud. That's how it works, Lena replied. Her voice carried no bitterness, just a steady truth. The movement wasn't noisy. There were no marchers at the gates, no chants in the terminals. It moved differently in quiet posts, whispered exchanges in break rooms, union meetings where flight attendants traded knowing looks, and like the low hum of an engine that never fully shuts off, it kept building, steady, persistent, impossible to ignore. The real turbulence was only just beginning. He hadn't planned on stopping, but the cover froze him mid-step. Her eyes, steady, unflinching, looked straight through him from the glossy page. The headline read, "Dignity in the Sky." He reached for the magazine, then pulled his hand back. "You buying that?" the clerk asked, not looking up. He shook his head. No, his voice was dry. He stepped back, pretending to scan the snacks, but his eyes kept drifting to her picture. A man in line noticed, heard about her. Whole thing went viral. Said she never raised her voice. She didn't, the clerk replied. Didn't have to. Their words scraped at him. He turned and walked out, the sliding doors hissing open. The air outside was heavy with the smell of jet fuel. Overhead, a 747 tore through the clouds, loud, powerful, untouchable. His chest tightened. For years that was his sky, his runway, his kingdom. Now, nothing. A voice from behind startled him. "Thought I'd see you here." He turned to find an old colleague, uniformed crisp, cap tucked under one arm. "You still flying?" "Every week," the man said. "Not the same without you." He forced a smile. "Guess things change." The colleague studied him. "You hear they named a scholarship after her. Pilots of Color program. Big deal." His mouth opened, but no words came. Another plane climbed into the sky, engines screaming. He didn't look up this time. Didn't have to. The sound was enough. Sharp, punishing. He shoved his hands in his pockets and started walking. The magazine cover still burned into his mind. For the first time, he understood. Some turbulence you can't train for.